Incidentally, behind the chicken yard, Grandpa was having trouble with a fox going in and eating a chicken a day. And so to stop that, he took a great big chain and put it around the entrance where the fox was, and that stopped it. Because the fox, when he saw that chain there, he was sort of leery of the situation and wouldn't go in and eat a chicken because he was afraid to cross that chain for fear that something would happen to him.
While we're on the subject of chickens, let me hasten to add that Grandfather was very, I can't hold this over the camera.
That's all right.
Was very progressive here. He was the only one in the whole countryside that knew about white leghorn hens, and when I was here he had about 300 of them. And of course they were the only white eggs in the whole countryside, and he got a penny or so more a dozen when he took them down to sell them. And he got as much as 8 cents a dozen for them. And he learned about these white leghorn hens from his visit to California, where he had spent some time around what is now called Saratoga, down near Santa Clara.
It was interesting to note that in the winter time, out of those 300 chickens that he had, sometimes he wouldn't even get enough eggs to supply his needs because the chickens were barely able to maintain themselves in the cold, primitive facilities that they had at that time. Of course, they were not primitive at that time. This was normal. But in the spring, when the chickens would start laying eggs, I've seen him eat as much as a dozen eggs for breakfast in the morning because he would be so hungry for eggs. And we all ate lots of eggs when we had when the chickens were laying. But when the chickens were not laying, we didn't eat very many eggs.
View of the rear of the house, and some of these trees were probably, we know that they were the ones that were originally here, these large maple trees on the side of the house and surrounding the yard. I think that generally speaking it's a big disappointment to see how deteriorated the fences are and how run down some of the things that he prized rather highly, like that arched gate.
Telephone lines that go by the house were not here when we were here back there in the 1930s. They're something that has been added since then. Yeah. I don't even remember.
I'm on the scene, and this is the scene of the oak grove here that as young boys we enjoyed. And of course the place is considerably different because the fences are all missing. Always kept in good repair, and the oak grove, as I mentioned before, our grandfather cut down a tree to commemorate each person's visit here. He cut down a tree for firemen, and they're all in. And we're going to walk up.
Grandpa would.
Whose land was this?
I think we're on what was Cox's land.
This is in back of the ranch, huh?
Back of the ranch. And the creek that I trapped along here was, I don't know the name of that creek. Somebody said it was Strawberry Creek. Or
I think it's Richland.
Richland Creek or something along in here, but I would have my traps along here, and I'd trap, and there's another fellow by the name of Fraley trapped along here too, and he had hip boots and he would trap the muskrat, but I never trapped the muskrat because Fraley was trapping here, and Grandpa said that he needed the money, that the trapping was important. And one time we caught I caught a complete black skunk down here in a trap, and Fraley smelled the skunk, and I arrived at the trap before Fraley did, and I saw the skunk in the trap, so I ran from here. I ran clear back to the ranch and got Grandpa, and he came out here with a 22. He said, and you put a 22 short shell in there because it was cheaper. It didn't cost as much. and we went back over here to where the thing was, and in the meantime, Fraley had arrived on the scene, and Fraley walked in, and he killed that skunk for me. For weeks later, I smelled Fraley when he would go trapping up and down the creek. And we took the trap over to some fellows over in here about where Oldham's place was, which he will show you later on the camera and so forth. And that fellow bought that skunk from me and paid me 50 cents for it, and he got $1.50. He got $1 for cleaning it, and I think that was a bargain. I don't remember now whether it was 50 cents or $1 I got for the skunk, but he did it for practically nothing. If I remember now that I think about it, I got $1 for this, $1.50 for the skunk, and by cleaning it, he'd sell it for $2 because it was a pure black skunk. It was very valuable. And
you mean it didn't have white lines down the side of it?
No white lines on it at all. It was pure black. Oh. And they were extremely valuable, a pure black skunk was. And so that was...
So you did your bit for Ecology Midwest, huh?
I would say that probably some woman who was in a better than average income was wearing that skunk sometime or the other.
How do you feel about all those animals you killed?
How do I feel about them?
Yeah.
I have no particular feeling for them. I think that it was great.
It was great. You have no remorse about the loss of all the dinosaurs and all the skunks and stuff?
No, because there's still plenty of skunks here. I just kept the ecology in balance.
How do you feel about the fact that there are no dinosaurs around here?
How do I feel about that?
Yeah.
I have no feeling toward that.
I feel grateful. I said I feel grateful.
And do you feel that that's the proper attitude for somebody to take in 1986?
For dinosaurs?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad that we have the remains and we know all about them in the museums. But I think it'd be rather difficult for us to be doing what we're doing here now if there was a dinosaur lurking around in Richland Creek.
Well, how do you feel about the Flintstones and the way they teach children that dinosaurs are nice?
I think that's very nice. It's a fine fantasy, and all of our young children are very fond of dinosaurs, as you know, and they get models to make, they get coloring books, and I think that's fine. It's a good fantasy.
I think this is a good direction. Is this creek flowing?
It's flowing down here like this.
And this is the creek where you did all the trapping?
This is where I trapped.
We think this is Richland Creek.
I'd say 15 or 20 steel traps, and I had about 15 box traps. And every time it would snow, I would catch heavily in rabbits in both steel traps and box traps, because every one of this land was all drained down here with drain tiles back there in the 1930s. And I had set the traps in the drain tiles. It was a favorite place of mine to set traps. I caught one of Grandpa's prize cats in one of the traps, and Grandpa, I called Grandpa, and he came down and he had to kill his prize cat. He couldn't get it out of the trap without killing it. Those traps kept the mice out of his corn.
You mean the cats?
The cats did. Yeah, the cats kept them.
Well, what were your real feelings about killing that cat?
I'll tell you, that cat died hard. He died hard. Grandpa he was caught in 2 traps, and his legs were badly mutilated, and Grandpa knew that he would never be much of a cat after that, even if we released him from the traps. And so he killed him right there he took a stick that was about that long and went up there and he killed that cat.
And that was the end of the cat story, huh?
That was the end of the cat story.
Okay, I'm going to mention that this river is a little creek, and it's called Richland Creek, and it's a tributary to the Kaskaskia River, which is down down here about 5 miles, and then that Kaskaskia runs into the Ohio River, and the Ohio River runs into the Mississippi, and the Mississippi runs into the Gulf of Mexico, and the Gulf of Mexico is connected to the Pacific Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean is connected to the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean is connected. Oh, shut up. We're still following the creek down, and this is the area where Olden had his traps, and this was also an area where we crossed the creek frequently to go over to the neighbor's house, which was located up on that hill there, and it was called the Cox's house, Charlie Cox.
Who knows who'll be looking at us sometime or another at a family reunion or something, and they'll say, who are those two individuals?
Well, who are you? I've never heard you mentioned on this scenario anyway.
He's by Snyder.
This is Al Snyder.
Byron and Alden.
Alden, yes.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And
we have a younger brother, Alan A. Snyder, more better known as
The photographer.
A Square Snyder.
A Square.
MD FACS.
I'd say all of that plowed ground over in there is about 40 acres, and this plowed ground was just about the original 40 acres that my grandfather had, plus the little grove on the other side. You can see in the distance the barn that had been reconstructed since the 1940s, and the old house is still about the same as it was. One big thing I notice is the absence of fences. It's been opened up. Grandpa had two good pastures, plus what he was farming. In other words, he had the thing cut up in about 3 different fields or so that he farmed, maybe more, maybe 4 fields. And 2 of them would be pasture, and he would pasture one in the summertime, and one would be the early spring pasture. And he generally used it for his milk cows and his horses. The pigs were confined, and the chickens were up around the barn, and so these were the animals that he would use. That is, the pastures would be used primarily for his one milk cow.
We're walking back now toward the farmhouse along the road, and we've just going toward the farmhouse, and if we sweep around here, we see that there's a field of Timothy hay. That field always used to be planted with corn.
New information. Right there. Sweet. Right there it says 8:30, and I assume it's 8:30 a.m. 1922.
Wouldn't anybody else assume that that's August the 30th?
It might be August the 30th, but it has a colon in here. So it could be August 30th, 1922. Yeah, you're probably right. Because see, it would probably be August 30th. You think he would write it like that, August 30th?
And there's the handwriting of our grandfather, huh?
Yeah. Notice the curly Q as it comes down like this.
He was orphaned at 8 years of age, and I don't think that he had any formal education at all, did he?
He said he went through the 2nd grade.
He went through the 2nd grade.
When I was with him, he claimed he was the 3rd grade.
And his father